In the remote corners of Wyoming, where the wind carved stories into ancient stone and the sky stretched endless above forgotten highways, there existed a town called Crossroads, population 847.
Our primary
Kind of place
objective is
where
to
everyone
secure the
knew
northern
everyone's
sector.
business.
We'll advance in 3
Or
waves,
so they
starting at
thought.
0500.
Every morning at precisely 6:47 a.m., a figure emerged from a rusted trailer on the eastern edge of town. She was thin, weathered by time, and something else. Something the people of Crossroads could never quite name. Her hair, once dark as midnight, had turned the color of winter clouds. Her face carried lines that spoke of sleepless nights and memories too heavy to share. Her name was Evelyn Hartwell, but no one in Crossroads called her anything at all, because in a town where everyone knew everyone, Evelyn Hartwell had become a shadow, a presence without substance. She walked 3 miles every morning, her left leg dragging slightly with each step, a limp that had been with her so long it seemed part of her skeleton. The military-issue jacket she wore had faded from olive drab to something closer to the color of dried grass. No insignia, no patches, no hint of the woman who once wore it with 4 eagles on her shoulders. The walk took her 47 minutes. She counted every step. Old habits, the kind that never die, even when you want them to. Rosie's Diner sat on the corner of Main and 4th, a relic from the 1960s with chrome trim and red vinyl booths that had been patched so many times they looked like quilts. The neon sign buzzed with half the letters burned out. It read, Row IE's Din R, now, but no one had bothered to fix it in years. Evelyn pushed through the door at exactly 7:34 a.m. The bell above jangled. No one looked up. She made her way to the corner booth, the one by the window, where she could see the door. Always the door. Her back never faced an entrance. Another old habit. The kind that kept you alive when alive was all that mattered. The table was scarred with decades of coffee rings and carved initials. Someone had etched JW plus MR forever into the wood back in 1983. Evelyn ran her finger over the letters, sometimes wondering if JW and MR had made it, if forever had lasted. Rosie Keller, 55 years old, with tired eyes and hands that smelled permanently of coffee grounds, approached with a pot. She didn't ask, just poured. The cup filled with dark liquid that steamed in the cold morning air. Evelyn wrapped both hands around it, seeking warmth that never quite reached her bones. $2.50, Rosie said, not making eye contact. Evelyn placed $3 on the table. Same as always. 50-cent tip. Not too much, not too little. Just enough to not be memorable. Rosie took the money and walked away without a word. No, how are you? Or cold morning, isn't it? Nothing. Because you don't acknowledge what you don't see. And in Crossroads, Evelyn Hartwell might as well have been furniture. At the table near the counter, 3 young men slouched over their phones. Dalton Pierce, 21, with a neck tattoo of a skull, and a future pumping gas at his uncle's station. Brock Henley, 22, already on his 2nd drunk driving charge and 3rd failed semester at community college. Travis McGee, 19, who still lived in his parents' basement and spent 16 hours a day playing Call of Duty. Bro, that Damascus camo grind is insane, Dalton said loud enough that everyone in the diner could hear. Took me 3 weeks straight. That's nothing, Brock countered. I got a 36 kill streak last night. 36. Dude, I'm basically a sniper god. They laughed. The kind of laugh that filled space but meant nothing. Travis glanced toward the window booth where Evelyn sat. His eyes passed over her, like she was part of the furniture. You guys see that old lady? She's here every single day. Just sits there staring. Probably got nowhere else to go, Dalton said, not lowering his voice. Heard she lives in that shitty trailer by the junkyard. My dad says she's crazy, Brock added. Like PTSD or whatever. Vietnam widow or something. Vietnam was like the 70s dumbass, Travis said. She's not that old. Whatever, man. Point is, she's creepy as hell. They went back to their phones, back to their games where death meant nothing, and you respawned in 3 seconds. Evelyn heard every word. She always did. Her hearing had stayed sharp even as her body failed. Another gift from the old days. The days when hearing something a half second too late meant you died. Or worse, someone else did. She took a sip of coffee. It was bitter. She preferred it that way. Across the diner, at a booth near the bathrooms, Mayor Clayton Grayson held court with his usual breakfast crew. 3 men in their 60s, all veterans, all wearing baseball caps with unit insignia, all certain they knew what service meant. "I'm telling you, the ceremony next month has to be perfect," Grayson said, spreading papers across the table. "We honor our boys who served. That's what Crossroads is about." Vernon Walsh, former Army mechanic, squinted at the list. "You got all 15 of us on here. Every veteran in town," Grayson confirmed. "Bob from the hardware store, Frank from the post office, you, me. Jimmy Pete. All of us." "What about that woman?" asked Raymond Cotter. "Ex-Navy, 3 years on a destroyer that saw exactly 0 combat. The one who lives out by the junkyard." Grayson frowned. "Mrs. Hartwell? She ever mentioned serving, never mentions anything," Vernon said. "Hell, I don't think I've ever heard her voice. Probably wasn't even in." Raymond scoffed. "Women didn't do real service back then. Nurses maybe, admin work." "Even if she was," Grayson said, setting the list aside, "she's not exactly community-minded. Been here 6 years and never came to a single town meeting, never talked to anyone. Can't honor someone who won't even acknowledge you exist." They nodded in agreement. The matter settled. Evelyn Hartwell would not be on the list. Evelyn heard this too. She took another sip of coffee. Her hand didn't shake, not where anyone could see. The morning crawled forward. Customers came and went. The door opened and closed. The bell jangled. No one looked at the woman in the corner booth. She had become part of the architecture, a fixture, background scenery in other people's lives. At 9:15 a.m., Evelyn placed another dollar on the table and stood. The process took longer than it should have. Her left knee didn't bend the way it used to. Something about shrapnel and bone fragments and surgeries that happened in field hospitals decades ago. The doctors had done their best. Their best meant she could walk. Most days. She limped toward the door, past Dalton and Brock and Travis, who didn't look up from their phones. Past Rosie, who was wiping down the counter. Past Mayor Grayson and his crew of self-appointed town historians. The bell jangled as she left. No one said goodbye, because you don't say goodbye to someone who isn't there. The walk back to the trailer took 53 minutes. 6 minutes longer than the walk-in, because by 9:30 a.m., her leg hurt more. The cold settled into the old wound like an uninvited guest who knew all your secrets. The trailer sat on a patch of dirt and dead grass behind Earl's auto salvage. Earl had died in 2019, but his son never bothered changing the sign. The salvage yard was a graveyard of rusted trucks and cars with missing engines, skeletons of vehicles that once carried people to jobs, to families, to lives that mattered. Evelyn's trailer was a 1987 Fleetwood 34 feet of aluminum and regret. The siding had oxidized to a chalky white. One window was covered with duct tape and cardboard. The front steps were cinder blocks. She climbed them carefully, unlocked the door with a key that stuck in the lock, stepped inside. The interior was sparse. A narrow bed with military tight corners, a hot plate on a counter, a small table with 1 chair, a TV that only got 3 channels, no photographs on the walls, no decorations, no signs that a human being with a past and a personality lived here. Except for one thing. Evelyn walked to the back of the trailer, to a drawer built into the wall beneath the bed. She knelt down her knees, screaming in protest, pulled the drawer open. Inside, wrapped in a plastic bag to keep out the moisture, was a small wooden box. She lifted it out with hands that had suddenly begun to shake, set it on the bed, opened the lid. The first thing visible was a medal, silver star suspended from a blue ribbon with thin white and red stripes. The citation card beneath it read, "For gallantry in action against an enemy of the United States." Beneath the medal, a photograph, black and white edges curled with age. 23 people in desert camouflage, standing in front of a Humvee somewhere in Iraq. The photo was dated January 27, 1991. In the center of the group stood a woman. Younger, stronger, with sharp eyes and a jawline that could cut glass. Colonel's eagles on her collar. Her name tape read Hartwell. Next to her, a young man with a wide smile. His name tape read Hartwell M. Lieutenant Marcus Hartwell. 25 years old, little brother. Evelyn's fingers traced his face in the photograph. Even now, more than 3 decades later, she could hear his voice, his laugh, the way he called her Colonel in front of the others, but Evie when they were alone. She closed her eyes, and suddenly, she wasn't in a trailer in Wyoming anymore. She was in Iraq. January 28th, 1991. Night. Desert, cold, that cut through every layer of clothing. Sand in everything, your food, your water, your teeth, your soul. The command bunker was barely a bunker. More like a reinforced tent with radio equipment and maps spread across folding tables. The maps showed positions, troop movements, supply lines. The maps showed everything except the truth that they were 60 miles behind enemy lines with intelligence that was 3 days old and a command structure that had already written them off. Colonel Evelyn Hartwell, 35 years old, stood over those maps. 160 soldiers under her command. Bravo Battalion, 3rd Infantry. The 1st Battalion level operation in Desert Storm, commanded by a woman. Historic, the brass had said. Pioneering, the newspapers would call it. If they survived. Around her, the command staff. Captain Rodriguez. Lieutenant Briggs, Sergeant First Class Washington. And Lieutenant Marcus Hartwell, her brother, who'd insisted on being assigned to her unit despite every regulation and family connection rule in the book. Intel says Republican Guard is pulling back, Lieutenant Briggs said. He was 36, stocky with a Boston accent, and a wife back home pregnant with their 3rd kid. Could be a clear run to the extraction point. Intel is 3 days old, Evelyn said. Her voice was steady. Command voice. The voice that didn't show doubt even when doubt was all you had. For all we know, they've reinforced every mile between here and there. So what's the play, Colonel? Rodriguez asked. Evelyn studied the map. Her finger traced a route. We move at 0500, fast and quiet. Standard column formation. Rodriguez, you take point with 1st Platoon. Briggs, your rear guard with 3rd. What about recon? Marcus asked. His voice was different from the others, tighter, because he knew his sister's mind, knew when she was calculating acceptable losses. Evelyn looked at her brother. For just a moment, the colonel disappeared, and the older sister surfaced. The one who'd taught him to ride a bike, who'd bloodied Tommy Richardson's nose when he'd made Marcus cry in 4th grade, who'd held his hand at their father's funeral. Then the moment passed. She was the colonel again. You take 2nd Platoon for advance recon. 12 men. You sweep 2 clicks ahead. Report back every 15 minutes. Any contact, you fall back immediately. No heroics, Lieutenant. Marcus straightened. Yes, ma'am. No heroics. The briefing continued. Coordinates, radio frequencies, fallback positions. The machinery of war. The illusion that you could plan for chaos. At 0300, the camp fell into the tense quiet that comes before movement. Soldiers checked weapons, tightened straps, wrote letters they hoped they'd never have to send. Some prayed. Some joked. Some just stared at the sand and thought about home. Evelyn found Marcus near the vehicle bay. He was checking his rifle, a ritual he'd performed 1,000 times. Their father had taught him. Their father who'd served in Vietnam and come home with demons that whiskey couldn't drown. Marcus, she said quietly. He looked up, grinned. Colonel. Don't, she said. Not right now. The grin faded. He set the rifle down. Evie, you okay? I'm sending my little brother into enemy territory at dawn. How okay should I be? You're sending a trained officer who happens to be your brother. That's not how it feels. Marcus stepped closer, lowered his voice so only she could hear. Hey, you remember when I was 7 and I fell through the ice on Miller's Pond? Evelyn nodded. She remembered. God, she remembered. The crack of ice, his scream, the black water swallowing him. She'd been 14, home from school, and she'd run onto that ice without thinking, pulled him out, saved his life. You jumped in without hesitating, Marcus said. You saved me then, and you've been saving me ever since. But Evie, I'm not 7 anymore. I'm a trained soldier. I can save myself now. And more importantly, I can save others. Marcus, I'm proud to serve under you, he interrupted. I'm proud you're my CO, and I'm proud to do my job tomorrow. So let me do it. Trust me the way I trust you. Evelyn wanted to pull rank, to reassign him, to keep him somewhere safe, or as safe as anywhere in a war zone could be. But she couldn't, because he was right. He wasn't a child anymore. He was a soldier, her soldier, and she had to trust him. 20 minutes on the recon, she said. You report every 15. Any contact you fall back. That's an order, Lieutenant. Marcus saluted. Yes, ma'am. He turned to walk away, then stopped, looked back. Evie, if things go sideways tomorrow, they won't. But if they do, I need you to know. This was my choice, all of it. The Army, this unit, being here. My choice. Not yours. Never yours. Evelyn felt something cold wrap around her heart. Don't talk like that. I'm just saying, whatever happens, you don't carry it. Promise me. Marcus, promise me, Evie. She wanted to refuse, wanted to tell him nothing was going to happen, that they'd complete the mission and be home by February. And he'd meet his niece or nephew Rodriguez's wife was having a girl Marcus was sure of. It said she was carrying high and everything would be fine, but the words stuck in her throat. I promise. She lied. Marcus smiled. Dimples showed. See you on the other side, Colonel. He walked away into the darkness. Evelyn watched him go. She didn't know it would be the last conversation they'd ever have. Back in the trailer, Evelyn opened her eyes. Her face was wet. She touched her cheek, surprised. She hadn't cried in years. Hadn't let herself. Crying was for people who had the right to grief. People who hadn't made the choices she'd made. She carefully placed the photograph back in the box, closed the lid, returned it to the drawer, locked it all away like she did every morning after returning from Rosie's diner. The rest of the day stretched ahead, empty hours that needed filling. She had a small television that got 3 channels. The afternoon would bring game shows, then news, then whatever syndicated drama was running in the evening slot. She'd watch without seeing, exist without living. But not yet. At 3:47 a.m., every night, Evelyn woke up. Always 3:47. The exact time Marcus had died, though she wouldn't know that for certain until years later, when the after-action reports were declassified. The body knows what the mind tries to forget. She'd learned to prepare for it, to have something ready for the hours between 3:47 and dawn, when sleep was impossible and memory was inescapable. She pulled a spiral notebook from beneath her mattress, the kind students used in school. She'd filled 17 of them over the years. This was number 18. She opened to a blank page, picked up a pen, and began to write. January 29th, 1991. Operation Desert Thunder. Day 1. The words came slowly, at first, then faster. Her handwriting was tight controlled, the same precision she'd brought to everything in her life. The precision that had made her an excellent officer. The precision that hadn't saved her brother. She wrote about the mission briefing, the coordinates, the radio frequencies, the way Marcus had smiled. She wrote it all down in minute detail, as if by recording it perfectly, she could somehow change the outcome, as if the words on paper could rewrite history. She'd been writing the same story for years. Different details, different angles, but always the same ending. Always the same guilt. Outside, the Wyoming wind picked up. It rattled the trailer's thin walls. Somewhere in the salvage yard, loose metal clanged against metal. The sound of things breaking, always breaking. Evelyn wrote until her hand cramped, until the words blurred, until the past became present and the present became unbearable. Then she closed the notebook, returned it to its hiding place, lay down on the bed without undressing, stared at the ceiling. In 6 hours, she'd wake up, walk 3 miles to Rosie's diner, sit in the corner booth, fade into the background again, because that's what she'd become. Background. A face without a story. A woman without a past. The next morning arrived the way it always did. Too soon and not soon enough. Evelyn pulled herself out of bed at 6:30 a.m. The limp was worse today. The cold had settled deep into her bones overnight. Some mornings she wondered if she'd even make it to the diner. Other mornings she wondered why she bothered. But routine was everything. Routine kept you moving. Movement kept you alive. And staying alive, even this half-life, this shadow existence, was the punishment she'd earned. The walk took 51 minutes today. 2 minutes faster than yesterday. Small victories. Rosie's diner looked the same as always. The same burned-out neon. The same smell of coffee and bacon grease. The same faces in the same booths, having the same conversations they'd had yesterday and would have again tomorrow. Evelyn pushed through the door. The bell jangled. No one looked up. She made her way to the corner booth, slid into the cracked vinyl, positioned herself so she could see the door. Rosie appeared with coffee, poured without speaking, set down a single laminated menu, even though Evelyn never ordered food. $2.50, Rosie said. $3 on the table, 50-cent tip. The ritual complete. The diner filled with its morning sounds, clinking silverware, mumbled conversations, the hiss of the griddle, the thump of Rosie's shoes on linoleum. All of it washing over Evelyn like white noise, the soundtrack to being unseen. Dalton, Brock, and Travis were back at their usual table. Same conversation, different day. "Dude, check out this Vietnam documentary," Travis said, his phone screen reflecting in his glasses. "These guys went through some serious shit." "My grandpa was in Nam," Brock said. "He doesn't talk about it much. Says it was hell." "That's real war," Dalton added. "Not like today where everything's drones and computers. Back then, you had to have actual balls." They laughed, that empty laugh again. "Hey, you think that old lady over there was around for Vietnam?" Travis asked, glancing toward Evelyn's booth. Dalton snorted. "Women didn't fight in Vietnam, dumbass. They were like nurses and shit." "Still," Travis said, "she's old enough. Maybe she saw some stuff." "Yeah, probably saw her husband get blown up or something. That's why she's all weird and traumatized." More laughter. They returned to their phones. Evelyn's coffee had gone cold. She drank it anyway. At the mayor's table, Grayson was reviewing the Veterans Day ceremony plans again. He'd been planning this event for 3 months. It was going to be the biggest thing Crossroads had seen since the county fair got shut down for health code violations. "The VFW is lending us their flags," he said. "We'll have 15 of them, one for each veteran. Presentation of colors, the whole 9 yards." "This is going to be real nice," Vernon Walsh said. "About time we got recognized proper." "Damn straight," Raymond Cotter agreed. "Community needs to remember who served, who sacrificed." The conversation continued. Details about podiums and speeches and catered sandwiches from the subway 2 towns over. Not once did anyone mention the woman in the corner booth. Not once did anyone wonder if she had a story. Because people without presence don't have stories. They're just scenery, background, the wallpaper of other people's lives. Evelyn stared out the window at Main Street, at the pickup trucks driving past, at the American flag hanging outside the post office, faded and frayed at the edges, at the town that had become her prison and her penance. She thought about leaving. She'd thought about it before, many times. Just getting on a Greyhound and disappearing to some other small town where she could be equally unseen by a whole new group of people who'd never know her name. But leaving felt like running, and she'd run far enough. Run for decades. This was where she'd stopped. This was where she'd serve her sentence. Life without parole. At exactly 9:15 a.m., she prepared to leave, placed her dollar on the table, began the slow process of standing. That's when the sound came, low at first, distant, a rumble that cut through the diner's ambient noise. Everyone heard it. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Even Dalton looked up from his phone. The rumble grew louder, deeper, the sound of heavy engines, multiple vehicles. Through the diner's front windows they appeared. 3 Humvees, military olive drab, moving in perfect formation down Main Street, in Crossroads, Wyoming, where the most exciting vehicle was usually Hank Peterson's restored '67 Mustang. The Humvees slowed, then stopped it, right in front of Rosie's diner. The diner had gone completely silent. Every person pressed against the windows, craning their necks. The lead Humvee's door opened. A man stepped out. He was tall, powerfully built, despite his age. Late 60s, maybe 70. His uniform was immaculate. Dress blues perfectly pressed. medals on his chest, rows of them ribbons in colors that spoke of places and actions most people only saw in movies. And on his shoulders, 4 stars, a 4-star general, in Crossroads, Wyoming. Holy shit, Dalton whispered. The general stood by the Humvee for a moment, surveying the street. Then he began walking toward the diner. His posture was military perfect. His shoes struck the pavement with authority. The diner door opened. The bell jangled. General Montgomery Briggs stepped inside. Every eye in the room fixed on him. Mayor Grayson stood up so fast he knocked over his coffee. Vernon Walsh's mouth hung open. Even Rosie had frozen mid-wipe, her dish towel suspended in air. The general didn't acknowledge any of them. His eyes swept the room with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent a lifetime assessing threats and opportunities. His gaze moved past the gawking teenagers, past the mayor, past Rosie, and stopped. On the corner booth, on the woman sitting there with her cold coffee and her decades of silence. The room held its breath. General Briggs began walking, each step deliberate, each footfall echoing in the impossible silence. He walked past Dalton's table, past the mayor's booth, past the counter where Rosie stood paralyzed. He walked straight to the corner, to the woman no one saw. Evelyn Hartwell looked up slowly. Her hands were wrapped around the coffee cup. She'd been preparing to stand to leave, to disappear back into her routine. But now she sat frozen, watching this 4-star general approach her table. His face was older, weathered. But she knew that face. God help her, she knew it. "Monty," she whispered. The first word she'd spoken in Rosie's diner in 6 years. Maybe the first word she'd spoken to another human being in months. General Montgomery Briggs stopped directly in front of her booth. He stood at attention. And then in a movement that seemed to stop time itself, he brought his right hand to his forehead in a crisp, perfect salute. "Colonel Hartwell." His voice was thick with emotion, but steady. Command voice. The voice she remembered from all those years ago, when he'd been Lieutenant Briggs and she'd been his CO. The diner remained frozen. No one moved. No one breathed. Evelyn stared at the general, at her former subordinate, at the man whose life she'd saved and whose promotion she'd never witnessed. Tears began to form in her eyes, the second time she'd cried in as many days after years of drought. "You didn't have to come," she said softly. "Monty, you didn't have to—" "Colonel," he interrupted gently. "After all these years, this is long overdue." He held the salute, waiting. Slowly, painfully, Evelyn Hartwell stood. Her left leg screamed in protest. Her body felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. But she stood, and with hands that shook only slightly, she returned the salute. 2 soldiers, separated by rank and time, and everything that had happened between then and now. Connected by something that civilians in this diner could never understand, would never understand. General Briggs lowered his salute, reached into his jacket, pulled out a small black box. He set it on the table, opened it. Inside, resting on white velvet, was a medal. Not silver this time, gold. A 5-pointed star, hanging from a light blue ribbon. The Medal of Honor. Every person in the diner craned their necks trying to see. Dalton's phone was out recording. Mayor Grayson looked like he might have a heart attack. General Briggs turned to face the diner. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of command, the authority of 4 decades in uniform, and the absolute conviction of someone delivering truth. "This woman is Colonel Evelyn Hartwell, United States Army, retired." The words hit the room like artillery shells. Colonel Hartwell was the first woman to command a battalion-level operation in Operation Desert Storm. January 29, 1991. Her unit, Bravo Battalion, 3rd Infantry, was cut off 60 miles behind enemy lines. 160 soldiers under her command. Surrounded by Republican Guard forces, 5 times our number. The diner remained silent, listening, finally listening. "Command wrote us off, told us to scatter and evade, told us we were acceptable losses." His voice hardened. "Colonel Hartwell told command to go to hell." A ripple went through the crowd. Vernon Walsh leaned forward. Even Dalton had stopped recording and was actually listening. "She violated direct orders, diverted air support meant for another operation, led a ground assault herself while wounded, pulled me out of a kill zone while under fire. 32 of us made it home that night because of her." General Briggs paused. When he continued, his voice had softened. But 5 didn't make it. 5 soldiers stayed behind to cover our retreat, to buy us time, to save us. He looked back at Evelyn, at the woman who'd carried this weight for so long. And one of those 5 was her brother. The silence in the diner changed, became heavier, sacred. Lieutenant Marcus Hartwell, 25 years old. He volunteered for the rear guard, covered our extraction, died saving 32 lives. General Briggs's voice cracked slightly, including mine. Evelyn's tears were flowing freely now. She didn't wipe them away, didn't hide them. For the first time in decades, she let herself be seen, really seen. Colonel Hartwell refused the Medal of Honor in 1991, refused every citation, every commendation. She left the Army, changed her name, disappeared. He turned back to the diner. For years, we've been looking for her, for the woman who saved my life, who saved 31 others, who sacrificed everything. He picked up the metal box, extended it toward Evelyn. Colonel, the President of the United States, the Department of Defense, and 32 veterans who owe you everything. We're here to ask you, please, let us honor you the way you deserve. Let us honor Marcus. Let us honor all 5 who didn't come home. Evelyn looked at the medal, at the general, at the diner full of people who were finally seeing her. She thought about Marcus, about his smile, about his last words. See you on the other side, Colonel. She thought about years of silent mornings, of cold coffee in empty rooms, of punishment without parole. And she thought about a promise she'd made and broken. I won't carry this, she'd told Marcus. She'd lied then, but maybe it was time to stop lying. Her hand shook as she reached out and took the box. The silence in Rosie's diner shattered like glass. Mayor Grayson was the first to move. He stumbled forward, his face pale, his hands trembling. Colonel Hartwell, I'm so sorry. We didn't know. Vernon Walsh stood next, his VFW cap clutched in his hands. I served in the Army, 20 years. I'm ashamed, truly ashamed. Yes. Raymond Cotter, the ex-Navy man who dismissed her just yesterday, couldn't even meet her eyes. He stood there, decades of pride crumbling, unable to form words. But it was Dalton Pierce who dropped to his knees. The 21-year-old with the neck tattoo and the Call of Duty statistics who'd called her creepy just hours ago knelt on the dirty diner floor. His face was wet. We're so sorry. God, we're so sorry. We didn't know. We should have asked. We should have seen you. Brock and Travis joined him, kneeling beside their friend. 3 young men who'd spent their mornings playing at war, now confronted with someone who'd actually lived it. Evelyn looked at them. All of them. The mayor who'd left her off his list, the veterans who'd dismissed her service, the boys who'd mocked her existence, and she felt something unexpected. Not anger, not vindication, just exhaustion. The kind that settles into your bones after carrying weight too long. Get up, she said quietly. Her voice was rough from disuse, but it still carried command. All of you, get up. They rose slowly, uncertain. Rosie Keller approached the booth, her dish towel still in her hands. She was crying. Mrs. Hartwell, I served you coffee for 6 years. 6 years. And I never once asked your name, never looked at you. Her voice broke. I'm so ashamed. Evelyn turned to look at the woman who'd poured her coffee every morning. Rosie, who was 55 and tired and probably had her own burdens, who worked 12-hour shifts and went home to an empty apartment and maybe understood loneliness better than anyone here. You weren't supposed to see me, Evelyn said. I didn't want to be seen. General Briggs placed a hand on the back of the booth. Colonel, with your permission, there's more to say, more they need to hear. Evelyn looked up at him, at Monty Briggs, who'd been a 36-year-old lieutenant with 3 kids and a wife back home, who'd been lying in sand with his femoral artery pumping blood into the desert when she'd dragged him to cover. They don't need to hear it, Monty. It won't change anything. Respectfully, Colonel, yes, they do. And yes, it will. He turned back to the assembled crowd. What happened on January 29th, 1991, isn't just a story about one brave woman. It's about the choices we make when everything's on the line, about what command really means, and about a price that no one should have to pay alone. He gestured to the booth across from Evelyn. "May I?" She nodded. He sat. The four-star general in his dress blues, sitting across from the unseen woman in her faded jacket. The diner crowd pressed closer, forming a semicircle. No one wanted to miss a word. The operation was supposed to be simple. General Briggs began. 60-mile insertion behind enemy lines. Gather intelligence on Republican Guard positions. Extract before dawn. In and out. Clean. He paused. It went wrong in the first 12 hours. Evelyn closed her eyes. She could see it. God, she could always see it. Our intel was outdated, Briggs continued. The Republican Guard hadn't pulled back. They'd reinforced. By the time we realized we were surrounded, 800 enemy combatants, 160 of us. No air support allocated. No extraction scheduled for another 18 hours. Mayor Grayson leaned against the counter. What did command say? Command said scatter and evade, every man for himself. They called us acceptable losses. Briggs's jaw tightened. But Colonel Hartwell looked at those 160 soldiers' kids, most of them barely old enough to drink legally, and she said no. No, Vernon Walsh repeated. No. She said we weren't acceptable losses. We were soldiers. We were Americans. And she was bringing us home. Briggs looked at Evelyn. All of us. Travis McGee, the 19-year-old who'd spent his life respawning in video games, spoke up. But how I mean you were outnumbered 5-1, with no support. She created support, Briggs said. At 0700 hours, Colonel Hartwell got on the radio, used an emergency frequency, contacted an F-16 squadron that was supposed to be supporting Operation Crimson, 50 miles north. Wait, Dalton said. She stole air support from another mission. She didn't steal it. She redirected it, using authorization codes that technically she had no right to use. Briggs smiled slightly. Codes belonging to a 2-star general who'd retired 6 months earlier, but whose clearance hadn't been revoked yet. She hacked the system, Brock asked, sounding genuinely impressed. She found a vulnerability and exploited it. The F-16 pilot asked for authorization. She provided codes. He verified. And 10 minutes later, 5,000 pounds of ordnance turned that Republican Guard position into a crater. The diner murmured. Even Raymond Cotter was nodding his earlier dismissiveness, replaced with grudging respect. But bombing wasn't enough, Briggs said. We still had to break through their perimeter. Colonel Hartwell organized a breakthrough assault. 40 soldiers, straight into the gap the airstrike created. Who led the assault? Mayor Grayson asked. Briggs looked at Evelyn. She did. The room went quiet again. A battalion commander doesn't lead ground assaults, Briggs explained. They command from the rear. That's protocol. That's how you maintain tactical control. But Colonel Hartwell knew that if we were going to punch through, our soldiers needed to see their commander willing to die alongside them. He touched his left leg unconsciously. She took shrapnel to her shoulder 12 minutes into the assault, kept moving. When I went down, with a round through my leg, bleeding out, she dropped her rifle and dragged me 200 yards to cover while under fire. Rosie gasped. Vernon Walsh removed his cap entirely. That's when she made the call, Briggs said. His voice had gone quieter, heavier. The call that saved 32 lives and cost 5. Evelyn's hands tightened around the metal box, her knuckles white. She needed a rear guard, someone to hold the line while the main force broke through, someone to buy us time. Briggs paused. Minimum 12 men, maximum survival chance 10%. Jesus, Dalton whispered. Lieutenant Marcus Hartwell volunteered. The name hung in the air. Brother, soldier, volunteer. Colonel Hartwell refused the request, Briggs said. Ordered him to stay with the main force. But Marcus pulled rank of a different kind. He reminded her that he was the best tactical officer in the battalion, that his squad trusted him completely, and that if anyone could hold that line for 20 minutes, it was him. Evelyn's voice emerged barely a whisper. I should have ordered him to stand down. You did. 3 times. He disobeyed a direct order because he knew what needed to happen. He was my brother Monty. I was supposed to protect him. He was your officer, and he was protecting you, protecting all of us. Briggs leaned forward. Permission to share what happened next. Evelyn looked at him, years of silence pressed down on her shoulders, years of carrying this alone. Maybe it was time. Maybe Marcus deserved to have his story told by someone who'd been there, someone who'd survived because of his choice. She nodded. General Briggs stood, addressed the room like he was addressing troops. At 0845 hours, Lieutenant Marcus Hartwell took position with 12 soldiers at grid coordinate 749er. The main force began breakthrough. Marcus's squad engaged Republican Guard units attempting to flank us. They held that position for 23 minutes. 23, Travis asked. You said 20 minutes. He gave us 3 extra. 3 minutes that meant 6 more soldiers made it to cover. Briggs's voice roughened. At 0908, their position was overrun. Radio went silent. We kept moving because that's what Marcus ordered us to do. What he died making sure we could do. The diner was silent, except for the sound of Rosie crying. Final count 37 soldiers in the breakthrough force. 5 KIA in the rear guard. 32 survivors, including one very angry, very wounded colonel who'd just lost her little brother. Evelyn's tears were falling onto the metal box, now darkening the velvet. I gave the order. I sent him there. It was my call. No, Briggs said firmly. It was his call. He volunteered. You accepted because refusing would have meant choosing him over the mission, over the other 158 soldiers counting on you to get them home. He was 25 years old. He was a soldier doing his job, and he knew exactly what he was doing. Mayor Grayson spoke up, his voice unsteady. Colonel, what happened when you got back to base? Evelyn wiped her eyes. I was arrested. Court-martial proceedings for violating direct orders, misappropriation of military assets, reckless endangerment. They court-martialed you. Vernon Walsh looked outraged. After you saved 32 men, I violated orders, used stolen authorization codes, got 5 soldiers killed. No, Briggs interjected. The JAG office started proceedings, but 32 soldiers filed a joint petition. Every single survivor testified, said you'd saved our lives, that Marcus and his squad had volunteered, that without your actions all 160 of us would have died. He smiled slightly. Took 2 weeks, but charges were dropped. You were awarded the Silver Star and recommended for the Medal of Honor, which I refused. Which you refused. You left the Army 3 months later, discharged honorably, and then, Briggs spread his hands, you vanished. Changed your name from Evelyn Hartwell Morrison back to your birth name. Cut off contact with everyone from the service. Moved to Wyoming. Became what you became. Dalton spoke up. Why, I mean, you were a hero. Why hide? Evelyn looked at the young man, saw in his face every soldier she'd ever commanded. Young, certain, unable to comprehend the weight that comes after. Because heroes don't send their little brothers to die, she said simply. But he volunteered, Brock protested. It doesn't matter. I was his commanding officer. I was his sister. I had the power to say no, to choose someone else, anyone else. But I said yes, because tactically he was right. His squad was the best. He was the best. Her voice cracked. So I chose the mission over my brother, and I've lived with that choice every day since. The room absorbed this. The terrible mathematics of command. The impossible choices that leave scars no metal can heal. Rosie approached with a fresh pot of coffee, poured Evelyn a cup without asking, set it down gently. I don't know if this helps, but my father was in Vietnam. He was a Marine, Khe Sanh. He survived, but his best friend didn't. And my father spent 40 years drinking himself to death because of it. She paused. He died 5 years ago. Liver failure. And you know what he said to me at the end? He said he wished he'd lived instead of dying slowly, that his friend had died quick and brave, but he'd died every day for 40 years. Evelyn met Rosie's eyes, saw understanding there, recognition. Don't do what my father did. Rosie said softly, don't die slowly. Your brother died quick and brave. Don't make his sacrifice meaningless by wasting your life. Before Evelyn could respond, the diner door opened again. A younger officer entered, captain's bars on his uniform. He approached General Briggs, saluted, handed him a folder. Briggs opened it, read, nodded. The captain left. Colonel Hartwell. Briggs said, his tone shifting to something more formal. There's something else, a reason I came today, beyond just honoring you. Evelyn tensed. Monty, if this is about going to Washington for some ceremony, it's about a letter. Written January 28, 1991, the night before the operation. He removed a yellowed envelope from the folder. Lieutenant Marcus Hartwell wrote it. Left it with the company clerk with instructions to deliver it to you if he didn't make it back. The metal box nearly slipped from Evelyn's hands. What? The clerk was KIA 3 days later. The letter went into archives. We found it 2 years ago when we started looking for you, but we couldn't deliver it because you'd disappeared. He held out the envelope. Evelyn stared at it like it might explode. I can't, she whispered. You need to. We all do. Her hands shook as she took the envelope. The paper was old, fragile. Her name was written on the front in Marcus's familiar handwriting. Colonel Evelyn Hartwell, only if I don't come back. She looked up at Briggs, at the crowd, at all these strangers who'd ignored her for 6 years and now hung on her every breath. I can't read this in front of everyone. Then I'll read it, Briggs said gently. If you'll allow me, because Marcus's words deserve to be heard. Evelyn wanted to refuse, wanted to take the letter and run back to her trailer and read it alone in the dark where no one could see her break. But maybe Rosie was right. Maybe dying slowly was worse than dying quick. She handed the envelope back to Briggs. Read it. He opened it carefully, unfolded the single sheet of notebook paper inside, cleared his throat, and began. Dear Evie, if you're reading this, I didn't make it out of tomorrow, but I need you to know something. You didn't send me to die. I chose this. I chose to protect you and 159 brothers and sisters behind me. Briggs's voice wavered slightly, but he continued. You taught me what it means to be a soldier, what it means to be a leader, what it means to make impossible choices. Remember when you were 14 and I fell through the ice at Miller's Pond? You jumped in without hesitation. You saved me without thinking about yourself. That's who you are, Evie. That's who you've always been. Dalton was crying openly now. So was Mayor Grayson. Vernon Walsh had his arm around Raymond Cotter's shoulders. If I die tomorrow, it'll be doing what I was born to do. Protecting people I love. And that includes you, big sis. You've protected me my whole life. Let me protect you this once. Let me protect all of us. Briggs paused, took a breath. Don't carry guilt for my choices. Don't hide from the world because of me. You saved 32 men that night. I saved you. That's a fair trade in my book. The best trade I'll ever make. The general's voice was thick now. Live the life I couldn't, Evie. Be the hero you are. Make Mom proud. Make me proud. And please, for God's sake, don't spend the rest of your life punishing yourself for my choice. That would break my heart worse than dying ever could. He looked up. It's signed, Your little brother who loves you, Marcus. P.S. Tell Mom I love her. Tell her this was worth it. The silence that followed was absolute, sacred. Evelyn sat with tears streaming down her face. All these years she'd carried this weight, and Marcus had written these words the night before he died, had known exactly what she'd do, had tried to stop her from the grave. Don't die slowly, he'd written. Live the life I couldn't. She looked down at the metal box in her lap, the Medal of Honor. The nation's highest decoration, offered to her decades ago and refused, offered again now, not for her. Marcus had said that clearly, for him, for the 5 who didn't come back, for the 32 who did. She opened the box fully, lifted out the medal. The gold star caught the diner's fluorescent lights. Monty, she said quietly, if I accept this, if I go to Washington and let them put this around my neck, does it mean Marcus's death meant something? His death meant something regardless. 32 lives, that's what it meant. That's what it will always mean. Then why does it still hurt so much? General Briggs leaned across the table, took her free hand in both of his. Because you're human, Colonel. Because you loved him. And because some wounds don't heal. They just become part of who we are. He squeezed her hand. But Marcus was right. You've been dying slowly all these years. And I've got news for you. The 32 of us who survived. We've been living. We've had kids, grandkids, careers, lives, good lives, because of you and Marcus. His voice dropped. Don't you think we deserve to honor the woman who made that possible? Don't you think Marcus deserves to be remembered by someone other than you, sitting alone in a trailer? Evelyn looked at him, then at the crowd, at Mayor Grayson, who'd left her off his list, at the veterans who'd dismissed her, at the young men who'd mocked her, at Rosie, who'd served her coffee without seeing her for 6 years. They were all seeing her now, really seeing her. "I'll accept the medal," she said, "but not for me, for Marcus and the others, for Robert Kane and David Sullivan and William Torres and Sarah Bennett, the 5 who stayed behind." General Briggs smiled. "That's all we're asking. When P1 week, Pentagon, full military honors. The president will present it personally." He paused. "All 32 survivors will be there. We've been waiting for this moment, Colonel. We'd like to finally thank you properly." Evelyn nodded, felt something inside her shift. Not healing. That would take longer, maybe forever. But shifting. Like a door opening after decades locked. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." The diner erupted, not in cheers, that would have been wrong, but in applause. Quiet, respectful, reverent. The sound of a community recognizing what had been unseen for too long. Mayor Grayson approached. "Colonel Hartwell, I'd like to formally apologize on behalf of Crossroads. We failed you. We should have seen you. Should have asked. Should have cared. That's on us, on me." "You didn't know," Evelyn said. "That's not an excuse. You were here. You were part of this community. We should have made you feel welcome, regardless of your past. That's what communities do." He straightened. "When you get back from Washington, I'd like to discuss how we can make this right, starting with making sure you never have to walk 3 miles to coffee again." Vernon Walsh stepped forward. "Colonel, the VFW would be honored if you'd consider joining. We meet every Thursday, and we'd like to add your name to the Veterans Day ceremony, if that's okay with you." Raymond Cotter looked ashamed. "I said some things about women in service, about what real combat is. I was wrong, dead wrong, and I'm sorry." Evelyn looked at these men, these veterans who'd carried their own service like badges of honor while dismissing hers completely. She should have been angry, should have felt vindicated, but all she felt was tired, and strangely, unexpectedly a little bit lighter. "I'll think about the VFW," she said, "and the ceremony, but right now, I just need to process this." "Of course. Take all the time you need." General Briggs stood. "Colonel, I have a car outside. I'd like to escort you back to your residence. We have some paperwork to handle. Travel arrangements for Washington. And," he glanced at the crowd, "maybe some privacy." Evelyn started to stand. Her leg chose that moment to give out. She stumbled. 3 people lunged forward to catch her. Dalton, Briggs, and Rosie. They steadied her, helped her to her feet. And for the first time in 6 years, Evelyn Hartwell accepted help from the people of Crossroads. "Thank you," she said. As they moved toward the door, the diner parted. Every person stood at attention. Not military attention. Most of them had never served. But the best attention they could manage. Respect. Recognition. Finally. At the door, Evelyn paused, turned back. Marcus used to say something. He said it the night before he died. He said, "Some people are born to protect others." That's not sad. That's purpose. She looked at each face. He found his purpose at 25. It took me until 68 to understand what he meant. Purpose isn't about avoiding pain. It's about making pain mean something. She held up the medal. This doesn't erase what happened. Nothing can, but maybe it can mean something for Marcus, for the 5, for all of us. The door closed behind her. The bell jangled. And for the first time in 6 years, the people of Crossroads, Wyoming, knew the name of the woman in the corner booth. Colonel Evelyn Hartwell, hero, sister, human being, finally visible. The week between Crossroads and Washington passed in a blur of activity that felt almost violent after 6 years of silence. Evelyn's trailer, which had been her isolation cell for so long, became suddenly crowded. General Briggs arranged for military liaisons to help with preparations. A young lieutenant named Sarah Morrison arrived with dress uniforms, travel documents, and a schedule that made Evelyn's head spin. But the most unexpected visitors were from Crossroads itself. Tuesday morning, Rosie Keller knocked on the trailer door. She held a casserole dish covered in aluminum foil. "I made you breakfast," she said simply. "Figured you might need some real food before the trip." Evelyn stared at the dish like it was a foreign object. "You didn't have to." "I know, but I wanted to." Rosie met her eyes. 6 years I served you coffee. Let me serve you something better. That afternoon, Mayor Grayson arrived with a town council resolution. Official town letterhead, embossed, seal the works. The town of Crossroads formally recognizes Colonel Evelyn Hartwell for her service and sacrifice. We're also renaming Miller Street to Hartwell Avenue, if that's acceptable to you. Evelyn's throat tightened. Miller Street, where Marcus had pulled her from the ice when they were kids, where she'd saved him then before she'd failed to save him later. Marcus would like that, she said quietly. On Wednesday, the three young men, Dalton, Brock, and Travis, showed up with a pickup truck. We'd like to drive you to the airport, Dalton said, if you'll let us. After what we said, after how we treated you, we'd like a chance to make it right. Evelyn studied them.
Boys playing at manhood. Not so different from the soldiers she'd commanded. Not so different from Marcus at 18, signing up because he'd wanted to follow his big sister into service. All right, she said. Thursday morning, Vernon Walsh and Raymond Cotter arrived in their VFW uniforms. They stood at attention outside her trailer. When she opened the door, they saluted in unison. Colonel, Vernon said, we're here to escort you to the airport, with your permission. I already have a ride. Then we'll follow. We spent 6 years ignoring a genuine war hero while we patted ourselves on the back for our service. That ends today. We want to see you off proper. Evelyn wanted to refuse, wanted to tell them it was unnecessary, but she remembered Marcus's letter. Live the life I couldn't. Don't die slowly. You can follow, she said. Friday arrived with Wyoming's perpetually gray sky and a wind that cut through everything. Evelyn stood in her trailer at 0530 hours, staring at the dress uniform Lieutenant Morrison had brought. Army Service Uniform Class A. The jacket was new, but bore her old rank insignia. Colonel's eagles on the shoulders, rows of ribbons on the chest. Some she'd earned, some she'd refused, all of them now authorized for wear. She hadn't worn a uniform in decades. Her hands shook as she buttoned the jacket. The fabric felt foreign, too stiff, too formal, too much like remembering who she used to be before January 29th, 1991. Changed everything. There was a knock. Lieutenant Morrison entered. The young woman was efficient, professional, and reminded Evelyn painfully of every female officer who'd come after her. The ones who had it slightly easier, because Evelyn and others like her had kicked down doors. Colonel, the convoy is ready. General Briggs is waiting. Evelyn took one last look around the trailer. At the narrow bed, with its military corners. At the table, where she'd written 18 notebooks full of the same story. At the drawer, where Marcus's photograph lived. She'd packed the photograph, packed the medal Marcus should have received, packed years of grief into a single duffel bag. I'm ready, she said. Outside, Crossroads had turned out. Not the whole town, it was 600 on a Friday after all, but enough. Maybe 50 people lined the dirt road outside her trailer. They held American flags. Some held hand-painted signs, "Thank you, Colonel Hartwell," and "Crossroads honors our hero." And one carried by a little girl no more than 7 that just said, "Thank you for saving them." Evelyn's breath caught. General Briggs stood beside a black SUV. He saluted as she approached. "Colonel, your chariot awaits." Behind the SUV, Dalton's pickup truck was polished to a shine. Behind that, Vernon's Buick with a small American flag mounted on the antenna. And behind that, a dozen more vehicles. Crossroads was sending her off properly. "Monty, this is too much. This is long overdue. It's not nearly enough." The drive to the airport took an hour. The convoy stretched behind them like a funeral procession. But Evelyn realized that's exactly what it was. A funeral for the unseen woman she'd been. A burial of 6 years spent dying slowly. At the airport, a small regional hub that mostly served cargo and private planes, a military transport waited. C-130 engines already running. The rear ramp was down. The convoy parked. People emerged. The crowd from Crossroads, plus airport staff, who'd heard what was happening, plus a local news crew that Mayor Grayson had apparently tipped off. Evelyn wanted to flee. This attention, this visibility, it was everything she'd avoided for decades. But Briggs was beside her. "Steady, Colonel. You've faced worse than cameras." "Cameras don't shoot back?" "No, but they also don't let you hide anymore." Dalton approached carrying her duffel. "We got this." At the base of the C-130's ramp, Vernon and Raymond stood at attention. Behind them, arranged in 2 columns, were the 50 people from Crossroads. They'd formed an impromptu honor guard. Evelyn walked between them, slowly because of her leg, deliberately because rushing felt disrespectful to what they were offering. Respect, recognition, the visibility she'd avoided and now somehow needed. At the ramp she turned, looked back at these people. Strangers a week ago, still strangers in many ways, but witnesses now. Witnesses to her existence, her service, her grief. "Thank you," she said, her voice carried in the morning air, "for seeing me, finally." Rosie stepped forward from the crowd. "Bring yourself back home to Crossroads. We'll be here. We'll keep seeing you. Home." The word hit Evelyn like shrapnel. She hadn't had a home in decades. Just places she existed. But maybe that could change. She nodded, turned, climbed the ramp. The C-130's interior was military sparse. Web seating along the walls. Cargo netting. The smell of jet fuel and metal. Familiar. The kind of familiar that hurt. Lieutenant Morrison secured her duffel. "Flight time is 3 hours. We'll be landing at Joint Base Andrews. General Briggs will meet you there." Evelyn strapped in. The engine's pitch changed. The ramp closed, sealing her in with 2 crew members and Lieutenant Morrison. Through the small window, she watched Crossroads fade away, watched Wyoming disappear beneath clouds. 3 hours to think, 3 hours to prepare, 3 hours to decide if she could really do this. Andrews Air Force Base materialized through the clouds like a city. Runways stretched in every direction. Aircraft of every type, fighters, transports, helicopters, moved in choreographed precision. This was power. This was the machinery of the most advanced military on Earth. Somewhere in this machinery, Marcus had died. No, not here, Iraq. But the machinery was the same. The system that had trained him, deployed him, sent him into that desert, and brought back a flag-draped coffin. The C-130 landed with barely a bump. Professional, smooth. The ramp lowered, and Evelyn saw them. 32 people, standing in formation. All ages, some in their 60s, now some 50s. All wearing either military dress uniforms or suits with their medals pinned to the lapels. The survivors of Bravo Battalion. General Briggs stood at the front. "Colonel Hartwell, your battalion awaits." Evelyn descended the ramp. Her leg almost gave out halfway down, but she forced it steady. She would not stumble. Not here. Not in front of them. At the bottom, Briggs saluted. "Battalion attention." 32 people snapped to attention in unison. Decades later, they still moved like soldiers. "Colonel," Briggs said, "permission to introduce your survivors." Evelyn's vision blurred. She blinked hard. "Permission granted." Briggs gestured to the man beside him. Sergeant First Class Michael Torres. He was 19 in 91, now retired, 3 kids, 7 grandchildren. Owns a construction company in Texas. Torres stepped forward. His hair was gray now, but his eyes were the same. "Colonel, my granddaughter Elena just enlisted. Army, because I told her about you, about what real leadership looks like." He saluted. Evelyn returned it. Next was a woman in her 60s. Captain Linda Wu. She was 24, now a colonel herself, retired, teaches ROTC at Penn State. Wu stepped forward. "You showed me that women could lead in combat. I spent 30 years proving you right. Thank you." One by one, Briggs introduced them. Each had a story. Each had a life that existed because of January 29th, 1991. Children, grandchildren, careers, marriages, divorces, successes, failures. Life in all its messy, complicated glory. 32 lives, plus all the lives they'd created and touched. Hundreds of people who existed because Evelyn and Marcus had made impossible choices in a desert decades ago. The weight of it was crushing, beautiful and crushing. "There's one more person I'd like you to meet," Briggs said. He gestured behind the formation. A woman in her early 30s stepped forward. She looked like Marcus. Same eyes, same dimples, when she smiled nervously. "Colonel Hartwell," the woman said. "I'm Diane Hartwell, Marcus's daughter." Evelyn's world tilted. What? Marcus had a girlfriend before deployment. She was pregnant, didn't know until after he died. Diane's eyes were wet. "My mother tried to find you, but you disappeared. so she raised me alone. But she told me about my father, about his sister, the colonel, about the hero he died protecting. She stepped closer. I've been looking for you for 20 years, Aunt Evie. I wanted to meet the woman my father died for, the woman he loved so much he gave everything to save. Evelyn couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Marcus had a daughter. Marcus had a child, a whole person who existed who carried his DNA, and his eyes, and his... I have his letters, Diane said, the ones he sent my mother. He talked about you in every one, how proud he was to serve under you, how you were the best officer he'd ever known. She pulled out a photograph, and I have this, the last picture he sent before he died. The photograph showed Marcus in desert camos grinning at the camera. On the back, in his handwriting, tell our baby, I died doing something that mattered. Tell them their Aunt Evie is the bravest person I know. Evelyn took the photograph with trembling hands. He knew about you. He found out 2 days before the mission. My mother told him in a letter. He was so happy, so excited. Diane wiped her eyes. He died excited to be a father and proud to be your brother. Something inside Evelyn broke. Not shattered, she'd been shattered for years, but broke open, like a wound that had festered, finally lancing painful but necessary. She pulled Diane into a hug. This niece she'd never known, this piece of Marcus that had survived. He would have been an amazing father, Evelyn whispered. I know. My mother made sure I knew. They stood like that for a long moment. Aunt and niece, connected by a man who'd died decades ago, but whose love still echoed forward through time. General Briggs cleared his throat gently. The ceremony is tomorrow at 1400 hours. But tonight we're having a private gathering. Just the battalion. We'd like you to join us. Evelyn pulled back from Diane, nodded. I'll be there. That evening, in a private room at the officers' club, 32 survivors gathered with their families. The room was loud with conversation, laughter, children running between tables. Life. Abundant, messy, beautiful life. Evelyn sat at the head table, Diane beside her. People approached in steady streams, thanking her, showing her pictures of grandchildren, telling her stories about their lives. Sergeant Torres's granddaughter, the one joining the army, was there, 18 years old with Torres's eyes and her own fierce determination. Colonel Hartwell Grandpa says you're the reason he's alive, which means you're the reason I exist. So, thank you. For my grandfather. For my mom. For me. Captain Wu brought her daughter, a Marine pilot. This is Rachel. She flies F-35s. She's doing what we dreamed about back in '91, what you made possible. One by one they came, a parade of lives, of futures, of proof that January 29th, 1991 had meant something beyond grief. At 2100 hours, General Briggs stood, tapped his glass. The room quieted. I was a 36-year-old lieutenant with a wife and 2 kids and a third on the way. I was bleeding out in Iraqi sand, certain I'd never see them again. Then someone grabbed my collar and dragged me 200 yards while getting shot at. That someone was Colonel Evelyn Hartwell. He raised his glass. My third kid? She's a doctor now, saves lives every day. My grandkids, 6 of them. All exist because Colonel Hartwell decided I was worth saving. He looked at Evelyn. You've spent years thinking about the 5 who didn't come home. Tonight, I want you to look around this room. Look at the 32 who did. Look at our children, our grandchildren, our lives. The room was silent, every eye on Evelyn. You gave us this, Briggs said. All of this. And we've spent years wanting to say thank you. So on behalf of every person in this room, and every person we've brought into the world, and every person they'll bring into the world, thank you, Colonel. Thank you for saving us. Thank you for the impossible choice you made. Thank you for being the kind of leader who makes those choices so others don't have to. He raised his glass higher, to Colonel Evelyn Hartwell, and to Lieutenant Marcus Hartwell, who made the ultimate sacrifice so we could stand here tonight. To Colonel Hartwell, 32 voices echoed. To Lieutenant Hartwell. They drank. Evelyn tried, but the glass shook too much in her hands. Diane took it gently, set it down, held her aunt's hand. He's proud of you, Diane whispered. Wherever he is, Aunt Evie, he's proud. The next morning arrived cold and clear. Washington in autumn leaves, turning colors that reminded Evelyn of desert camouflage. Brown, tan, muted green, the colors of war. The Pentagon appeared massive and austere, a fortress of bureaucracy and power. Lieutenant Morrison led Evelyn through security, through corridors that seemed to stretch forever, past walls covered with photographs of every conflict America had ever fought. Somewhere on these walls, there would be photographs from Desert Storm, maybe even of Bravo Battalion, maybe even of Marcus. But there wasn't time to look. The ceremony was beginning. The Pentagon's central courtyard had been transformed. Rows of chairs filled with officers, enlisted personnel, civilians. At the front, a stage with the American flag and the Army flag. At the podium, the President of the United States. Evelyn's heart hammered. This was too much, too public, too visible. "Steady, Colonel," Briggs murmured beside her. "You've got this. I've faced enemy fire, Monty. This is worse. Same principle. One step at a time." They led her to a chair at the front. The 32 survivors filled the rows behind her. Diane sat to her right, Briggs to her left, surrounded by witnesses. The President approached the podium. Evelyn had seen this person on television and newspapers. But in person, the weight of the office was palpable. This was power. This was authority. "Ladies and gentlemen," the President began, "we gather today to honor a debt long overdue, to recognize courage that was demonstrated in the darkest hours, and to remember those who gave everything so others could have tomorrow." The speech continued. Evelyn heard it and didn't hear it. Her mind was in Iraq, in the desert. In the moment, she'd looked at Marcus and nodded. The moment that had defined everything that came after. "Colonel Evelyn Hartwell," the President said, "please come forward." Evelyn stood. Her legs screamed. She ignored it, walked to the stage, climbed the steps, stood before the leader of the free world. The President held the Medal of Honor. The gold star caught the sunlight, turning it into fire. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty. The President read, "Colonel Evelyn Hartwell, on January 29, 1991, demonstrated extraordinary heroism while commanding Bravo Battalion, 3rd Infantry Division during Operation Desert Storm, when her unit was surrounded by enemy forces and written off as lost. By command, Colonel Hartwell refused to accept defeat. She violated direct orders, commandeered air support, and led a ground assault while wounded, saving 32 lives at great personal risk." The President paused, looked at Evelyn. But the citation doesn't tell the whole story. It doesn't mention that one of the 5 soldiers who died covering that retreat was your brother. It doesn't mention that you've spent decades carrying that weight alone. It doesn't mention that you disappeared rather than accept recognition because you believed you didn't deserve it. The President's voice softened. But you did deserve it. You do deserve it. Not despite the impossible choice you made, but because of it. Because leadership means making choices no one should have to make. Because command means carrying weight no one should have to carry. And because heroism isn't about being fearless, it's about doing what's right, even when it destroys you. The President stepped forward, placed the medal around Evelyn's neck. The weight of it was nothing compared to what she already carried. But somehow, impossibly, it felt like sharing the load. On behalf of a grateful nation, the President said, "Thank you, Colonel Hartwell, for your service, for your sacrifice, for your brother's sacrifice. Thank you for showing us what leadership truly means." The President saluted. Evelyn, on instinct, returned it. The courtyard exploded in applause. Not the polite golf clap of diplomatic ceremonies, real applause. Thunderous. The 32 survivors stood applauding. Then everyone else stood. A standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes. Evelyn stood at the podium looking out at hundreds of faces. All seeing her. Really seeing her. She hadn't prepared a speech. Hadn't thought she'd be able to speak at all. But words came anyway. "This medal doesn't belong to me," she said. Her voice carried across the courtyard, amplified by microphones she hadn't noticed. "It belongs to 5 people. Lieutenant Marcus Hartwell, Sergeant Robert Kane, Corporal David Sullivan, Private First Class William Torres, and Private Sarah Bennett." She pulled out a photograph. the one from her trailer, the battalion photo from January 27, 1991. These 5 stayed behind so 32 could live. They made the hardest choice. They gave everything. This medal is theirs. She looked at Diane, at Briggs, at the 32. For years I've been absent. I made myself absent because I thought I didn't deserve to be seen. Because I sent my brother to die. Because I made choices that haunt me every day. Her voice strengthened. But last week, someone reminded me that my brother didn't want me to die slowly. He wanted me to live. And tonight, looking at 32 survivors and their children and grandchildren, I understand. Marcus didn't die for nothing. He died for this, for life, for futures, for proof that sacrifice means something. She held up the medal. I accept this, not for me, but for Marcus, for the 5, for every soldier who made impossible choices, and for the 32 who carry those choices forward every day by living full, beautiful, messy lives. She paused. I've been absent for years. Today I choose to be present, not because I deserve it, but because Marcus deserves to be remembered by more than just his sister's grief. He deserves to be remembered by the lives he saved, the futures he made possible, the niece he never got to meet, but who carries his eyes and his courage. Evelyn looked directly at the crowd. So if you want to honor me, don't thank me. Thank Marcus. Thank the 5. And then go live your life so fully, so completely, that their sacrifice means something. Make their deaths matter by making your life matter. She stepped back from the podium. The applause came again, softer this time, but deeper. Recognition. Understanding. The ceremony concluded. People approached. Handshakes. Thank yous. Photographs. The machinery of recognition. But what Evelyn remembered most was Diane taking her hand. He's smiling right now, Aunt Evie. I know he is. 3 days later, Evelyn Hartwell returned to Crossroads, Wyoming. The town had changed in her absence. Or maybe she changed and could finally see what had always been there. Main Street looked the same, but now people waved as she drove past. The flag outside the post office had been replaced with a new one, crisp and bright. And Miller Street had a new sign, Hartwell Avenue. Dalton Brock and Travis met her at the airport again. Drove her back in comfortable silence that felt like acceptance. Rosie's diner looked the same. Same burned-out neon, same smell of coffee. But when Evelyn walked in, everyone looked up. Everyone saw her. Colonel, Rosie called from behind the counter, your table's waiting. The corner booth had changed. A small brass plaque had been mounted on the wall above it. Colonel Evelyn Hartwell Medal of Honor. Hero, neighbor, friend. Evelyn slid into the booth, positioned herself to see the door. Old habits. But this time, when Rosie brought coffee, she sat down across from her. Tell me about Washington, she said. Tell me everything. And for the first time in years, Evelyn talked, really talked, about the ceremony, about meeting Diane, about the 32, about Marcus and the weight she'd carried, and the weight she was learning to share. Others joined, Mayor Grayson, Vernon and Raymond, even Dalton and his friends, listening with genuine interest to stories about real war from someone who'd actually lived it. The morning passed. The diner filled and emptied and filled again. And through it all, Evelyn sat in her corner booth, no longer unseen, no longer dying slowly, living, finally living. 5 years later, on a cold November morning, Evelyn Hartwell walked into Rosie's diner, now officially renamed the Colonel's Table, and found a young woman sitting in her booth. The woman was 18, wearing an Army ROTC uniform from the university 2 towns over. She stood quickly when Evelyn approached. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to take your table. It's all right, Evelyn said. Sit, please. The young woman sat. Evelyn slid in across from her. Rosie appeared with 2 coffees without being asked. I'm Autumn Mitchell, the young woman said. I've been studying you, your leadership, your decisions. I'm writing my senior thesis on female commanders in combat. Why? Because I want to be like you. I want to lead. I want to make a difference. Autumn leaned forward. How did you do it? How did you make those impossible choices? Evelyn looked at this young woman, saw Marcus in her earnest eyes, saw every soldier she'd ever commanded, saw the future. You don't make them alone, Evelyn said. You carry them with others. You accept that some choices destroy you. And you live anyway because that's what honors the ones who couldn't. She touched the Medal of Honor pin she now wore on her jacket every day. Leadership isn't about being fearless, Autumn. It's about being terrified and doing what's right anyway. It's about impossible choices and living with the consequences. And it's about remembering that you don't lead alone, ever. Autumn nodded, taking notes. Can I ask you something else? Sure. Do you regret it? The choice you made? Evelyn thought about Marcus, about Diane, about 32 survivors and their hundreds of descendants, about 5 names on a memorial wall in Washington. Every single day, she said honestly. But I also see the proof that it mattered. 32 lives. That's what it cost. That's what it bought. I regret the price, but I don't regret paying it. She smiled slightly. Don't become a leader if you want easy answers, Autumn, but do become one if you want to matter, if you want your life to mean something beyond yourself. They talked for another half hour. Then, Autumn left for class, and Evelyn sat alone in the booth that wasn't lonely anymore. Through the window, she watched Crossroads go about its morning. People she knew now, people who knew her, a community that had learned to see what had been unseen. Her phone buzzed, a text from Diane. Thinking about you and Dad today. Love you, Aunt Evie. Another from General Briggs. Annual battalion reunion next month. You're giving the keynote. No refusing. Another from Captain Morrison. Speaking at West Point on the 15th. Would be honored if you'd join me. Messages, connections, proof of existence. Evelyn looked at her reflection in the diner window. 73 years old now. Gray hair, lined face, scarred shoulder, bad leg, but visible. Finally completely visible. She thought about Marcus, about the letter he'd written decades ago. Live the life I couldn't. She was trying. God, she was trying. Outside, the Wyoming wind picked up, but it didn't sound like breaking metal anymore. It sounded like movement, like forward motion, like life continuing despite everything. Evelyn finished her coffee, left $5 on the table, generous tip, for Rosie, who'd become more friend than server, stood slowly, carefully. As she walked to the door, she passed her table, touched the brass plaque, felt the weight of the metal in her jacket pocket. Thank you, Marcus, she whispered, for teaching me that being unseen was just another way of dying. Thank you for making me live. The door opened. The bell jangled. Colonel Evelyn Hartwell stepped out into the cold Wyoming morning, into visibility, into life, into the future Marcus had died to give her. She was finally ready to live it, not without pain, not without regret, not without the weight of impossible choices, but living, fully, completely, visibly, the way heroes do when they finally stop hiding from the very thing that makes them heroic. The willingness to be seen, scars and all.